Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
You can go to NWS Alaska on Facebook, NWS Alaska on Twitter using the hashtag AKwx, or of course find us on YouTube during the afternoon. Here's a look at what's going on across the rest of the region. Now we're looking at the mainly smoke concerns at this point. Dense smoke advisories are posted for areas from Bettles all the way to Galena and the middle Yukon Valley and eastward into the Tanana Valley, mainly the western end of the Tanana Valley there. But smoke will continue to cover the skies, as you'll see on the satellite picture here, from the southwest all the way along the Yukon Valley to the Alcan border. But this is where it will be the worst and could affect your health, not to mention just to increase poor visibility concerns and perhaps even flying weather where you are. So let's take a look at the fire danger as it stands right now. High fire danger across a large part of the Copper River Valley, the Cook Inlet region, as well as areas on the western Kenai Peninsula into the Matanuska and Susitna valleys there. It's a little bit higher as you head up a little bit past Tenita Pass and into the Copper River Basin. And then across the middle and lower Yukon Valley, high fire danger continues there, as well as areas up around the Kobach and Noatak range there, a little bit north of the Yukon Valley. So many areas there across Alaska still under at least high fire danger. The good news is we are getting some rain that should affect mainly areas across the eastern and southeastern parts of the interior with a good, perhaps soaking rain as we get into the midweek. The bad news is that as we go into the weekend, another period of very warm and dry weather will set upon Alaska, so conditions may worsen after that point. Here's a look at the satellite picture across the Bering Sea and the North Pacific, and watch for several areas of low pressure across the North Pacific. You can see one area here. This is slowly working its way northward into the western Bering Sea, and you can see another area trying to organize on the eastern end of Asia. What you don't see is a line of storms that's going to come in and add a lot of moisture into the Gulf of Alaska. We've got one in place right now that's starting to move moisture northward, but we don't see a whole progression of these storms as we would in wintertime. So we are building in a ridge of high pressure as we head toward the weekend, and that again should help to enhance that warm and dry weather pattern. Here's a visible satellite picture, and watch for this really smooth, kind of opaque area of clouds. It's not clouds, it's smoke. What you'll see moving a lot is the cloud cover. What you won't see moving a lot will be the smoke. So keep your eyes on this area here and you'll be able to see that very clearly. See this right here? That's the smoke that's moving right up the southwestern parts of Alaska and into the Alcan border. A lot of the bubble kind of clouds that you see across the Gulf of Alaska, that's surrounding low pressure. It's just south of Kodiak Island this afternoon. We had some waves of rain moving through southeastern Alaska. Some places like Kodiak picked up an inch of rain from the low pressure system just to the south today. Clouds are bubbling up around the Alaska range. We saw several areas of lightning strikes and storms develop across southwest today. And we'll see more of that develop as we go into tomorrow afternoon. Looks like a much better chance for showers and storms across the Alaska range as we go into the daytime on Tuesday. Once again, many areas across the Yukon are experiencing smoke today, and out across the west, this is not smoke. This is clouds and stratus and fog. Very stable air mass still in place across the Bering Sea with high pressure in command there. So with all that said, here's the weather chart for today. 1,015 millibar high across the areas just west of the Pribilofs. Low pressure south of Kodiak at 1,007 millibars. Colder air slightly moving across the Gulf of Alaska. The frontal boundary is working north and east, and as it heads toward southeast, rain chances should pick up a little bit more in the widespread fashion for mainly central and northern parts of the Panhandle. High pressure sitting north of Whitehorse. About 1,010 millibars, also going to keep some showers focused just to the east and south of the Wrangell St. Elias. And colder air trying to drop southward across the Brooks Range. Really not horribly cold, but it should be enough to help keep more clouds focused on the Arctic coast. Low pressure working across the Bering Strait there, bringing another surface weather boundary closer to the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. That should help to start up a few areas of light rainfall as we get into tonight and tomorrow. Again, smoke expected to be present across the central and eastern interior, and again across some areas across the middle Yukon Valley and northward. Better chance for more solid rainfall across the North Pacific heading into the western Aleutians as we head through tonight. As we get into Tuesday, you should expect to see showers and thunderstorms firing up across the Alaska Range and across the middle Yukon Valley and south and west into the YK. Showers are expected across northern parts of southeast. Probably still see a little bit of sunshine across southern parts of southeast into the Dixon entrance, probably just a little bit east of Craig and Klawock. And light rains expected across the Alaska Peninsula and for Bristol Bay. Low pressure working out of the North Pacific will get a little bit closer to Kiska and Attu by Tuesday afternoon. You're going to see your winds come up a little bit more as we head into Tuesday night and then into Wednesday, especially for the central and western chain. And as we get into Wednesday, watch for showers and thunderstorms to be a little less numerous, but still finding possibilities of starting up there across the northern parts of the Alcan, and also across areas in the Copper River Basin, and maybe a few storms there generally west and north of Rainy Pass. Otherwise, we'll be looking at a better chance for rainfall, especially for areas in the east and southeastern parts of the interior. But after that, this ridge of high pressure will become more predominant across more parts of mainland Alaska, and that's when the weather starts to shift back toward warm and dry heading into the holiday weekend. Low pressure across the eastern Gulf, also still sitting there in prime position to bring rainfall into central, northern, and southern parts of southeast. Periods of rainfall will affect many areas there. It could bring another half inch of rain at least to some communities, maybe a little bit more if it sits tight. And our low pressure system across the North Pacific moving just south of the central chain. That's at 1,001 millibars. Watch for areas of rain from Kiska all the way eastward toward Adak, and then getting closer and closer to Nikolsky and parts of Dutch Harbor on Alaska as we get into Thursday and Friday. But the weather to come, again, for most of mainland Alaska will be this ridge of high pressure you see across the west coast. Temperatures today were fairly mild across southeast, again, where we had some sunshine. Temps popped back into the upper 60s, a fairly pleasant day there, again, for Craig and Petersburg and areas around Annette and Ketchikan after you got rid of the rainfall. Temps hovered in the lower 60s there. 62 around Juneau, 61 up around Skagway today, 55 for Yakutat. 50s and 60s around Prince William Sound. Valdez only 59 today, 62 in Homer, 63 for Kenai. About the same there for Anchorage, 68 in Talkeetna. Look like places out toward Golcana were in the mid-60s today with Northway at 72. Eagle was 73 degrees, and Fairbanks looked like the sky had cleared up a little bit more over previous days, and temperatures were back in the mid-70s. Looking further northward, Fort Yukon at 72. 63 around Anaktuvik Pass. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse back in the lower 70s today. And Barrow, big news for you, the ice, according to the ice radar, has gone out there. So conditions are starting to improve for more open water there around Barrow and certainly to the west. We'll take a look at that sea ice map here in just a little bit. Down on the Chukchi Seacoast, a little bit further south and west of Wainwright, the winds were a little gusty there today, over 30 miles an hour in many locations. Temperatures were cool back in the lower to mid 40s with Kivalina at 46 degrees, 54 in Kotzebue, 41 around Tin City, 46 was the temperature at 3 o'clock in Nome. Unalakleet reported 60 degrees. And you can see a big shift here across the Yukon Valley, the Tanana Valley from McGrath and all the way out toward Bethel. Temperatures were in the 70s today, a very warm afternoon for many locations there. And again, many experiencing that smoke from numerous wildfires in the area. Around Bristol Bay, king salmon made it up to 68 degrees, 68 in Dillingham, 67 in king salmon, and mid-50s there for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint at 61, lower 50s around the Pribilofs. Atka was 48 degrees, Adak was 52, and 45 degrees out around Shemya earlier this afternoon, again at 3 o'clock. Now, overnight low temperatures will hover in the 40s and 50s for many areas across the Yukon Valley, southwest in the 40s and 50s. The Alaska chain as well as, or the Aleutian chain and the Alaska Peninsula in the 40s for most, and 49 around Kodiak Island. Lower to mid 50s for southeast, the Arctic coast in the 30s and 40s, and south central expecting to see 40s to about 50 degrees overnight. High temperatures tomorrow will be back on slow bake for the Yukon Valley, all the way from southwest in the upper 60s and lower 70s to nearly 80 degrees around Fort Yukon in the middle Tanana Valley. Again, and the hotter and drier conditions get, the harder it is to fight some of those fires. Now, however, we were talking about rain moving up across the east and southeast, so we're going to get a slug of moisture moving in from the Gulf, and that should be in place as we head into Tuesday and Wednesday before conditions really start to warm up once again. Now around Norton Sound, temperatures were in the mid-50s. We expect that to continue again as we head into tomorrow. Kotzebue Sound temperatures also back around 50s to probably mid-60s for some of the more interior locations just offshore. 40s and 50s across the Arctic coast, and closer to 70 degrees once again if you're working up in Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. South central areas back in the mid-60s. Cordova, you're looking at 58, with Kodiak a cooler 54. Here's your flying weather now. IFR conditions are expected to continue under the effects of high pressure across the Bering Sea. Look for IFR mainly across the outer areas of Kotzebue Sound and across the western tip of the YK, and then all the way down across the Bering Sea coast. For most areas in the central and eastern chain, and maybe the far west as well, you might see some improvements of ceilings generally west of the Pribilovs there as high pressure is dragging in some drier air, but many will see widespread areas of fog and stratus again. Watch for periods of rain to lower visibility and ceilings around Prince William Sound and across the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula down to just about Kodiak Island. And then we'll see some IFR generally north and east of the Alcan and north of Skagway and Haines. Otherwise, watch for showers and thunderstorms to develop, many of those across the Yukon Valley, across the Alaska Range, and north across the eastern parts of the Brooks Range tomorrow. Let's take a look at your past conditions. We do expect to see some convection firing up around Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass throughout the day. Most of the visibility issues there and your flight restrictions will probably hover around VFR, so not really anything except isolated restrictions expected at this point. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass will see MVFR through most of the day. Showers and thunderstorms are expected to develop in the afternoon there, and for Rainy Pass starting out around VFR in the morning. Windy Pass expected to turn over to MVFR throughout the day. Watch for showers and thunderstorms to develop during the day there. And for Isabel Pass, VFR conditions should be your best bet in the morning. And if you're looking for VFR there for Mentasta, expect similar conditions as well. Showers and thunderstorms may develop there. And for Tanita Pass, MVFR expected by mid to late afternoon. Porter's Pass will probably be marginal throughout most of the day, with IFR expected on the eastern side, and better improvements there for the western side, of course. Chilkoot and White Pass expected to lean over toward IFR conditions as the day goes on, so your best bet would be in the morning in that case. Freezing levels show a pocket of cool air out across the Gulf of Alaska. That, of course, matches up with low pressure sitting right there. We've got much warmer conditions across south and east, and considerably warmer conditions across the central and western chain. Those levels between 10 and about 12,000 feet. The surface freezing line not located over mainland Alaska at all at this point. Your icing potential then, of course, isolated icing threats are a concern when we start to develop thunderstorms across the region, and over Kotzebue Sound and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, generally above 10,000 feet, we could see some threats from light to isolated moderate icing. Some of that as well around the southern Chugach Range, Prince William Sound, and the eastern end of the Kenai Peninsula. That will be a little lower, above 8,000 feet, and also across the central and western chain above 10,000. The jet stream shows low pressure across the western Gulf. This is keeping drier air across south and western parts of Alaska. And you can see our Pacific jet stream coming right in from the east, out of eastern Asia. That's up to about 95 knots now. And a south and westerly flow blowing moisture into southeastern Alaska. Wind speeds there drop off from 105 knots to about 50 knots as it reaches into British Columbia and the Yukon. We also have a westerly jet working its way just north of Barrow at 85 knots. At 9,000 feet, low pressure sitting just south of Kodiak Island. You can see that wind speeds are fairly light across the interior and across south central, and across southeast, though a little bit stronger, perhaps dying off from about 30 knots to about 10 to 20 knots as it crosses over the panhandle. And then a broad southerly flow here across the central and western chain that's running around 20 to 25 knots across the central and western Bering Sea. Low pressure is also guiding in much faster winds just south of that trough. We have west and northwesterly winds coming into the northern Bering Sea. Those become southwesterly, crossing over the western Brooks Range at about 15 to 20 knots. At 3,000 feet, you can see high pressures camped out just south and east of the Pribilovs. That's guiding in east and southeasterly winds across the central and eastern chain. A slightly faster flow there across Adak and Atka in the western Bering. Low pressure sitting very close to Kodiak Island, bringing in wind speeds from 15 to 20 knots, and light westerly winds across the central and eastern Yukon Valley, about 10 to 15 knots for most cases there, and southwesterlies blowing over the Beaufort Sea, about 10 to 20 knots. Turbulence should be fairly limited, so good news there, but again, around any convection that develops, watch for outflow winds to create at least some isolated turbulence in the area, and we're always on the watch for isolated severe once those towers get much taller. Watch for light to isolated moderate across the central and western Brooks Range, just south of St. Lawrence Island and across the northern YK Delta. And for the central and western chain, light to isolated moderate would be possible there, but as it stands now, no major turbulence concerns for any part of Alaska. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few minutes, we'll take a look at the sea ice edge, sea surface temperatures, and of course your marine weather forecast with a recap to follow. Stay tuned.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor. On behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation, thank you to Alaska Public Media for sponsoring this program. We are glad you could join us this evening, where we are happy to have back Millicent Hoytel. She is an accident investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board here in Anchorage. Welcome back, Millicent.
Thank you, Mary.
On our last show, we talked about how you got started with the NTSB with an internship, and you worked your way into an aviation accident investigator position here in Anchorage. We didn't mention that you were also the first female accident investigator in Alaska. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Are there many female aviation accident investigators in the NTSB?
About 20% of the regional investigators are female. That doesn't include headquarters. At headquarters, in every different discipline, there are female investigators. A lot of our management are females. So yes, I mean, it's not a 50% female, but there are definitely females well represented in all aspects of the board.
And it sounds like the percentages are higher than what you would find in the commercial pilot or general aviation pilot population as well. So very, very good.
Yeah, I think that in the past 15 years since I've been in aviation, that women have definitely become more commonplace in aviation roles, which is great, and in all types of them, in air traffic or in pilots, and I think that's wonderful. So.
Do you think it's made a difference? Does gender matter in doing your job or how people treat you?
I don't think so. I would like to hope that it doesn't, and I think that the more commonplace that females come in areas where they haven't been before, will change some of those viewpoints, and I would certainly hope that any female would know that she could do any role in any of these aviation jobs and be well supported.
I believe they can. They can certainly do the job well. Are there any areas in particular in safety that you'd like to focus on during your time as an investigator in Alaska?
Education is something that's important to me. I think as investigators, we see how sometimes shortcomings can happen with flight planning or currency issues, and we collect a lot of information and data, so it doesn't do good if we just hold on to it. So sharing what we learned is important, and there's so many safety organizations in the area and seminars and ways that pilots can learn. So I would like to get involved in that and help share the lessons that we've learned so that it doesn't happen to somebody else.
Great. I know a lot of pilots out there think that you have the dream job working with the NTSB. What kind of career advice would you give to somebody who is looking for a job similar to yours?
I would say work hard, especially to get this job with the board. It took a lot of patience. You know, it was almost 3 years before I got here. So I was persistent and I was patient, and something that helped me was that I was slightly diversified in my background, and that I had pilot training and air traffic training. Any type of accident investigation training would definitely, you know, behoove you, but really just not giving up and working hard, and which would apply to any aviation job anywhere, but that's what got me here. So.
And that kind of advice would apply to a male or a female?
Absolutely, yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add from maybe your background, your experience, or from your schooling that's really helped you do your job?
I think working with students was always a challenge, and seeing things from a younger aviator's point of view. So if if we see accidents that happen with somebody with low time, then we really want to focus on training and say this has to happen early in training. This is really important. Going back and getting a different type of degree helped me put the picture together of how pilots and air traffic work together and how weather works together. So that has helped me as an investigator see all the different things that go into just one flight.
So I guess the audience has heard it here, persistence and diversification
Yes.
are a good career plan.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Millicent. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Mary.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy this program, I encourage you to become a member of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. We appreciate your support, and we appreciate you tuning in to Hangar Flying. Until next time, thank you, and fly safely.
Thanks, Mary. Here's a look at the sea surface temperatures today. If you haven't looked at this chart in a while, you can probably guess what I'm going to talk about. Look at all the warm water across the Dixon entrance and working its way up into the Clarence Strait around Ketchikan and Annette, and across Prince William Sound, all the way around the northern parts of the Gulf. Still cool up around Cook Inlet and areas just south of the Alaska Peninsula. Considerably warmer water across Southwest and into Norton Sound. We still have cool water working through the Bering Strait, and you can see the warmth that's working its way up through the Chukchi Sea, obviously melting away the ice across areas closer to Barrow in recent days. So let's take a look at the ice chart, and there you go. Open water now just north of Barrow and all the way down the Chukchi Seacoast. We still have some lower concentration ice across the Beaufort Sea and across areas in the Chukchi Sea, but most of that again is offshore. So some big changes there in the last couple days, and with the heat we expect to develop across more areas into the holiday weekend, we'll see more changes across the Arctic coast as we head into the July 4th period there. You can check this out anytime, as well as sea surface temperatures that we just showed anytime you like by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php, and you can find an interactive map there. It'll be all look more like a patchwork kind of quilt, and you just click on the shape there and it will tell you how thick that ice is in that area. And you can also read more about the outlook over the next 5 days to find out where this chunk of ice should be headed there and what it looks like if you're in Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse or all the way out of Kaktovik. When will you see the ice recede? So all that information and more online anytime at your convenience. Looking in southeast, the winds will be blowing conveniently from the south and west there across the central and southern outer coast, about 10 knots or so. 3 to 4 foot seas are expected there. And across the northern Lynn Canal, wind speeds coming in from the south around 20 knots or so, about 4 foot seas expected. A little bit less than that heading southward as winds will only be blowing around 10 knots. As we get into Wednesday, look for a northerly flow across the central inner waterways around 10 knots with a northwesterly flow into the Clarence Strait. Southerlies diminish a little bit down to 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, and south and southeasterly winds coming up the outer coast on Wednesday up to about 20 to 25 knots. 5 to 6 foot seas expected in all areas there. For south central Alaska, wind speeds will be fairly light across Prince William Sound. 2 foot seas on the inside. South and westerlies coming in across the Cook Inlet region around 10 to 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas. Otherwise variable flow around the Barrens. Northeasterlies coming through Shelikof Strait with an easterly wind hitting the eastern side of Kodiak Island around 15 knots with a 5 foot sea. By Wednesday, you'll notice the wind's pretty light and fairly variable in most areas there. We'll keep a light easterly flow inside of Prince William Sound, and southerlies coming up Cook Inlet around 15 knots with 3 to 4 foot seas there. Otherwise, 4 foot seas across the northern western parts of the Gulf, and 2 to 3 foot seas west of the Barrens down Shelikof Strait, and 4 foot seas there east of the Barrens as we go through Wednesday. Across Tuesday on the Alaska Peninsula, light and variable flow inside of Bristol Bay with a 2 foot sea. Northerlies on the Bering Sea coast there with a 3 foot sea. North and easterly winds become a little more variable as you head down the coast towards Sand Point and King Cove. 10 knot wind with a 3 to 4 foot sea expected there. By Wednesday, the winds pick up a little bit more from the south and west inside of Bristol Bay. Northwesterlies from Port Hayden to Chignik there and south and west of Castle Cape. And southeasterlies coming into Sand Point and King Cove, 15 knots with a 5 foot sea. For the Aleutians, east and southeasterly flow develops there around Unalaska all the way out toward Atka and Adak, 15 to 25 knots with 6 to 8 foot seas on the Pacific side, 4 foot seas on the Bering Sea side with 8 foot seas from Kiska to Attu around 20 to 25 knots with an east and southeast flow on Tuesday. That's going to become a little more northerly out in the west on Wednesday as that trough moves to the east a little bit. You can see the wraparound winds coming in behind that. North and northeasterly winds there about 20 to 25 knots with seas from 8 to 10 feet as you get from Kiska to Adak. 11 foot seas there from Nikolsky to Atka and 20 knot winds there from the east with a 3-foot sea. On the Pacific side, seas will run from 6 feet there south of Nikolsky and Unalaska to about 12 feet as you get from Nikolsky all the way out toward Adak on a 30-knot wind from the east and southeast. Across the west coast, a southwesterly flow sending warmer air into the northern parts of the Bering, 15 to 25 knots with a 5 to 6 foot sea. High pressure sitting right about here. And that gives us a northwesterly flow outside of Kuskokwim Bay, a light and variable wind around the Pribilofs with a 2-foot sea. That's nice and comfortable. However, it's not going to clear away the fog in the stratus anytime soon. Wednesday, you're looking at south and westerlies or southeasterly winds there from the Pribilofs at 15 knots, a northwesterly flow in the Kuskokwim Bay area, and 15 to 20 knots there across the northern Bering Sea, with seas ranging from 3 to about 5 feet around the St. Lawrence seacoast. As we get up into Tuesday for the Arctic coast, a southwesterly flow there for the Chukchi Sea, about 10 to 15 knots, still looking at about 3 to 4 foot seas there from Point Lay to Point Hope. And east and southeasterly winds around the Beaufort seacoast, 10 to 15 knots are expected there. For Wednesday, expect a west and northwesterly flow, 15 to 20 knots, and then we're looking at southerlies picking up a little more from Kotzebue Sound to Cape Lisburne to Point Lay, and around 25 to 30 knots in the strongest areas. That's a look at Wednesday on the Arctic coast. Recapping tonight's weather, expect smoke across the Yukon Valley. Many areas from southwest all the way to the Alcan border are going to see a reduction in visibility, but the worst of it will probably be around the middle Yukon Valley, including areas in the western Tanana Valley, around Galena, and northward. You can expect dense smoke advisories there at least until 6 o'clock in the morning. Tonight's forecast shows a frontal boundary trying to make its way into the west coast, and it's not going to make a very quick progress inland. We can expect showers and thunderstorms around the Alaska Range and northward up to the Brooks Range as we head into Tuesday. A better chance of showers and storms there, and a better chance of rainfall across the east and southeastern interior, with rain moving into southeast Alaska by Wednesday. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.